A few hours before what was meant to be the most beautiful moment of his life, David Mercer sat alone in a quiet corner of the sprawling hotel suite meant for pre-wedding preparations, staring at a message that made his chest tighten until he could barely breathe. His wedding suit was laid out perfectly, the polished shoes reflected the soft golden light filling the room, but David felt none of the joy everyone expected him to feel. Instead, a cold wave of disbelief washed over him. The message said 7 words he would never forget: "You need to know the truth about Elena." Just 7 words, yet they hit him harder than any storm he had weathered in the corporate world. 7 words that felt like a gate opening to a truth he wasn't ready to face. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. David wasn't a man who rattled easily. He had endured business wars, lawsuits, betrayals in boardrooms, and the loneliness of climbing success faster than meaningful relationships could keep up. But this moment felt different, heavier, sharper. It wasn't business, it was his heart. It was everything he had built his dreams upon. The text came from an unknown number, but the sender claimed to have proof of something Elena had hidden from him, something tied to a man from her past. As David read the message again, questions flooded his mind. What truth could be so urgent that someone would contact him on the morning of his wedding? What did this stranger expect him to do with this information now? And if Elena truly had a secret, why hadn't she trusted him enough to share it? These questions pressed into him, refusing to let him move or think clearly. To understand why this moment shook David to his core, you must first understand the life he came from. David Mercer grew up in a modest neighborhood just outside Cleveland, where the scent of old wooden floors and the constant humming of his mother's sewing machine shaped his earliest memories. His father had walked out when David was 8, leaving the family with more debt than hope. As a child, David watched his mother take double shifts just to keep food on the table. He learned early that nothing in life was guaranteed, that trust wasn't something you gave lightly, and that people sometimes disappointed you even when they loved you. Still, his mother taught him to believe in goodness, even when the world seemed harsh. She would say, "David, success means nothing if you lose your kindness on the way up." Those words guided him as he built his life from the ground up. By the time he turned 39, David had become one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the United States. He founded a tech security company that revolutionized digital protection for major corporations, and soon enough his name appeared in magazines, on lists, and at elite charity events. Despite his wealth, he remained humble, preferring quiet dinners over flashy galas. His circle was small, trust even smaller. Then he met Elena Parker at a fundraising gala in Chicago. She worked in educational outreach programs and carried herself with a grace that felt both elegant and unpretentious. Her warm eyes and soft laughter drew him in instantly. She listened, truly listened, in ways that made him feel seen beyond the success and the pressure. Their relationship grew quickly yet naturally, a surprising ease that made David believe he had finally found a partner who understood both his heart and his fears. Elena, too, had a story textured with both beauty and struggle. She was raised by her aunt in a quiet Midwestern town after losing her parents in a car accident at the age of 14. The grief shaped her but never hardened her. She poured her life into helping underprivileged children access education, hoping to give them the stability she once longed for. Though not wealthy, she possessed a calmness and emotional maturity that David admired deeply. When they first began dating, she confessed she sometimes wondered whether she truly belonged in his world. He assured her that love didn't measure worth in dollars, and she smiled in a way that made him want to protect her from everything. Their engagement came after a year of quiet, steady love. David proposed during a simple dinner at home, not with fireworks or fanfare but with sincerity, and Elena accepted with tears on her cheeks. The months leading to the wedding were filled with moments that felt like scenes from a quiet fairy tale. They visited the venue, a historic mansion overlooking a lake, with admiration. They planned a ceremony that reflected who they were, intimate, elegant, meaningful. Elena chose a dress that made her look more like herself than a bride copied from magazines. David selected a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it felt like a second skin. They spent evenings reviewing guest lists and tasting cakes, laughing about the absurdities of wedding planning. But every now and then, David noticed a flicker in Elena's eyes, an uncertainty, a heaviness she tried to hide. When he asked about it, she always smiled and said she was just overwhelmed. He believed her, because he wanted to. Love does that, it makes us trust shadows we should question, and ignore signs that whisper, look deeper. 3 nights before the wedding, the first sign of trouble arrived quietly. David received an anonymous email containing a single blurry photo of Elena sitting across from a man in a dimly lit restaurant. They appeared close, too close. Their heads leaned inward, and Elena's expression seemed tense. David stared at the photo, confusion spreading through him. He wasn't a jealous man, and Elena had mentioned attending a meeting for her nonprofit work earlier that day, but something about the secrecy of the message unsettled him. The email contained no text, just the photo. David told himself there had to be a reasonable explanation, but sleep evaded him that night. The next morning, he confronted Elena gently. She looked startled, then sad, and said it was an old colleague helping her finalize grant paperwork. Her explanation was believable, but a flicker of discomfort crossed her face, which David pushed aside. Then came the message on the wedding morning. Unlike the anonymous email, this message contained words, pointed, urgent words, and a claim that the sender had proof Elena had been hiding something significant. David's breath hitched as he read the message again. The sender said there was a man Elena had been involved with long before she met David, a man she had supposedly cut ties with, yet traces of communication between them had surfaced recently. The sender insisted David deserved to know the truth. His chest tightened. Doubt crept in, testing every memory and promise. The timing was cruel, but the details in the message were too precise to be dismissed. Against the turmoil storming through him, David remained composed on the outside. Years of business battles taught him how to hide emotional tremors. He reached for his phone again and typed back, "Who are you, and what proof do you have?" Minutes later, the reply came with attachments, screenshots of messages, timestamps, and a photo of Elena walking into a cafe just a week ago with the same man from the earlier picture. David's heart pounded as he clicked through the images. The messages were cryptic, but they hinted at unfinished conversations, unresolved feelings, and guilt. One message from the unnamed man read, "You owe him the truth before the wedding." Another from Elena simply said, "I know. I'm scared." That one stung the most. Scared of what? Of losing David? Or of telling him something that might change everything? For the first time since meeting her, David felt something shift inside him, a fracture in the foundation of trust he believed was solid. He called his personal investigator, a man he trusted with sensitive corporate matters, and asked him to verify everything immediately. While guests began checking into the hotel, the investigator worked quickly and returned with information that made David's stomach twist. The man in the photos was named Matthew, a teacher from Elena's hometown. They had been in a relationship years before she met David. According to the investigator, they had separated amicably, but the emotional closure between them seemed incomplete. Recently, they had communicated again, though the messages did not confirm anything romantic, just tension, unresolved dialogue and emotional fatigue. David felt something crumble inside him. He remembered all the moments when Elena seemed distant, lost in thought. He recalled nights she stared out the window instead of joining him on the couch. Maybe the past she claimed was behind her wasn't behind her at all. With trembling hands, he closed the folder and tried to breathe steadily, but each inhale felt heavier, as though the walls around him were shrinking. If this story has your heart racing right now, comment, "I'm still watching," so we know you're here with us. And stay with me, because what happens next is something no one in that wedding hall could have predicted, least of all David. David sat in silence, letting the weight of the information press onto him like a physical burden. His hands shook slightly, something he rarely allowed himself to show. He had spent decades mastering his composure, yet now, on the morning of his wedding, He felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure if he was meant to step forward or step back. He thought of Elena's gentle smile, the nights they spent sharing childhood stories, the plans they made for the future, the whispered promises of building a home filled with warmth and laughter. Could all that have been real if she was still clinging to someone from her past? His phone buzzed again. This time it was his best friend, Sam, checking if he was ready. David replied that he needed a moment, but he didn't explain why. He wasn't sure he could articulate the storm inside him. He decided he couldn't walk into the ceremony without confronting Elena. He needed to hear the truth straight from her lips. With slow steps, David walked down the long corridor toward her suite. His breath caught as he reached the door, hearing faint movements inside. When he knocked softly, Elena opened it, her face lighting up briefly before dimming when she saw his expression. David stepped inside, noticing the delicate lace of her wedding dress hanging elegantly near the window. The room smelled of lavender and fresh flowers, a scent she always loved. He took a moment before speaking, choosing his words carefully. "I need you to be completely honest with me," he said. Elena's eyes widened, and fear flickered across her face. He told her about the messages, the photos, the warnings. As he spoke, tears welled in her eyes. She reached for his hand, but he gently pulled away. Elena lowered herself onto a chair, her shoulders trembling as she tried to find the words. She didn't deny the messages. She didn't deny meeting Matthew. Instead, she let out a shaky sigh and said something that stunned David, "I was going to tell you everything today." Her voice cracked, and her eyes searched his with desperation. She explained that Matthew had reached out not because she wanted to rekindle anything, but because he felt he needed closure after their painful breakup. Elena admitted she should have told David sooner, but fear had wrapped itself around her, convincing her she might lose the one good thing she had found in years. She said she met Matthew only to make peace with her past, to end the guilt she carried, but nothing inappropriate happened. As she spoke, David watched her, trying to decipher whether her trembling was from fear or sincerity. David wanted to believe her, but doubt had planted itself firmly inside him. Trust wasn't something he offered easily, and betrayal, even the possibility of it, cut deeply. He asked her why she didn't come to him earlier, why she hadn't trusted him with her fears. She said she felt ashamed, that part of her believed he would see her differently, less deserving of the life he offered her. "I wasn't hiding him because I loved him," she whispered. "I was hiding him because I didn't want to lose you." Her vulnerability softened something in him, but the pain remained. He nodded slowly, saying he needed some time. Without arguing, Elena let him go, understanding that pushing him would only create more distance. As he walked out of the room, David felt the weight of love and doubt pulling him in opposite directions, neither strong enough yet to outweigh the other. Back in his suite, David sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the envelope of evidence again. Every word, every image played tricks on his mind. He remembered his mother's advice about love being a choice you make every day, not just in moments of convenience. But what about moments like this, moments when the person you love forces you to question your definition of truth? He wondered whether forgiveness was something you offered immediately or something that grew slowly, earned through honesty. He thought about calling off the wedding, but he also imagined the devastation it would bring, not just to him and Elena, but to their families and friends already gathering, excited, hopeful. It wasn't the public shame he feared, it was the possibility of losing something that could still be salvaged. Yet he couldn't ignore the pain, the uncertainty gnawing at him. An hour later, David's investigator called again, this time with new findings that made David's breath halt. The investigator had spoken directly with Matthew, who agreed to clarify the situation. According to the investigator, Matthew confessed that his lingering feelings had led him to reach out to Elena, but she explicitly told him she was committed to David and needed to fully close that chapter of her life. The photos were of their final meeting, where she gently but firmly ended any emotional uncertainty between them. The investigator added something that tightened David's chest. Matthew said he reached out because he thought you deserved to know the full truth, but he also said Elena made it clear she loves you deeply. David felt a surge of conflicting emotions: relief, guilt, confusion. Had he misinterpreted her actions? Was the message meant to help him, not hurt him? The investigator continued, explaining that the mysterious message David received was likely from someone who knew about Matthew's distress, possibly a friend concerned about Elena's emotional burden. There was no evidence of cheating, manipulation, or deception beyond Elena's fear-driven hesitation to tell David sooner. When David hung up, he sat silently for several minutes, letting the information settle. Slowly, the tension in his chest began to loosen. He realized how quickly fear had driven him toward assumptions. He had allowed shadows to twist the truth into something darker than it was. A soft guilt crept over him. Elena hadn't betrayed him. She had struggled with fear, with past wounds, with the overwhelming weight of joining her life with a man of his stature. He realized he had spent so much time protecting himself from potential betrayal that he had forgotten trust sometimes required risk. David stood up and looked at his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him seemed like someone caught between past scars and future possibilities. He thought of his mother's words about kindness being the compass that guided true love. He saw that version of himself slipping beneath layers of suspicion and fear. With a deep breath, David made a decision that surprised even him. He reached for the letter Elena had written months ago during one of their early misunderstandings, a letter he kept in his wallet. It reminded him of her vulnerability, her depth, her sincerity. He read it again now, absorbing every word. By the time he folded it back into his wallet, he knew what he needed to do. He would walk toward clarity, not fear. He would walk toward truth, not doubt. And if Elena still wanted to build a life with him, he would meet her halfway. David went to Elena's suite once more. This time, he didn't knock softly. He walked in with a calmness that surprised her. She stood there in her wedding dress, her hair styled, her eyes swollen from crying, looking both breathtaking and fragile. He approached slowly. "I know everything now," he said gently. Elena braced herself, preparing for heartbreak, but David continued, "And I understand." Her lips trembled as she asked, "Do you still want this? Do you still want me?" Without hesitation, he took her hands. He told her he didn't believe love demanded perfection, only honesty and a willingness to grow. He apologized for doubting her so quickly, and she apologized for not trusting him with her fears sooner. In that moment, standing inches apart, they both realized love wasn't about being flawless, it was about facing flaws together. David whispered, "Let's walk forward, not backward." They decided to proceed with the ceremony. As they walked into the hall, the music began softly. Guests rose with smiles, unaware of the emotional storm that had just passed. David held Elena's hand tightly, not out of obligation, but out of choice, an intentional step toward forgiveness. When they reached the altar, David found himself unexpectedly emotional. The officiant spoke words about love, commitment, and partnership, and each line carried more weight than ever before. When it came time for their vows, David added something unplanned. "I promise to listen, even when I'm afraid. I promise to trust, even when uncertainty tries to pull me away. And I promise to walk with you, not ahead of you or behind you, but beside you." Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks as she repeated her own vows, voice shaking with sincerity. Their union wasn't perfect, but it was real. In the months that followed, David and Elena leaned deeply into rebuilding emotional transparency. They started couples counseling not because their marriage was failing, but because they wanted to strengthen it. Elena opened up about fears she had never voiced before, the fear of not being enough for a man as accomplished as David, the fear that her humble background made her seem small in his world. David reassured her again and again that he didn't fall in love with her resume, he fell in love with her heart. David also opened up about how his childhood abandonment shaped his tendency to fear betrayal. The counseling helped him release some of the defensiveness he carried silently for years. Through every conversation, every tear, every uncomfortable truth, their bond grew stronger. They were not perfect, but they were invested. And that made all the difference. Their marriage evolved into something profoundly grounded. They learned that honesty isn't just about confessing mistakes, it's about sharing fears before they become secrets. They learned that forgiveness isn't a single act but a choice made repeatedly in small moments. They learned that trust isn't rebuilt through grand gestures but through consistency, vulnerability, and patience. As time passed, the story of their wedding day didn't become a source of shame, it became a turning point. David often reflected on that morning, realizing how close he came to walking away from something beautiful because of fear. Elena often reflected on the same moment, realizing how close she came to losing the love of her life because she was too afraid to expose her wounds. Together, they turned what could have been a tragedy into the foundation of a deeper love, one shaped not by perfection but by courage. Now let me ask you, what would you have done if you were in David's position? Would you have called off the wedding? Would you have walked away? Would you have forgiven Elena? And if you were in Elena's shoes, burdened by fear and past pain, would you have confessed earlier or remained silent until the last moment? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, and we learn from each other's experiences. And if you've stayed with us through this emotional journey, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this, stories that speak to the heart, challenge your thoughts, and remind us that real life is filled with moments that test our courage, our patience, and our capacity to love. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in our next timeless story.